You're watching No Spin tonight. On the show, on Monday, social media giant Twitter told a court in Karnataka that the government was unfairly asking it to block handles during the farmers' protest in 2021 and that the blocking orders amounted to stifling free speech and the curbing of permissible political criticism. It's the latest in an escalating war between the government and social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, in which the government routinely sends orders to block or take down social media posts citing security concerns, but which often turn out to be politically driven, with the singling out of posts critical of the government or the BJP. The latest such instance emerges from an ongoing legal dispute between the government and Twitter over 10 blocking orders by the government issued between February 21 and February 22 of this year. On Monday, Twitter's lawyers told the court that the wholesale blocking of accounts is against Indian laws. This is what the lawyers said to the court. Twitter lawyers to Karnataka High Court. We just go through that. During the farmers' agitation in Delhi, the government, had simply asked us to block the accounts. When newspapers and TV channels are reporting it, why tell Twitter to completely block all these accounts, the lawyer said. Freedom of speech includes the right to criticize the government. The Supreme Court has said that you may criticize within the bounds of the law. This is all Twitter lawyers to the Karnataka High Court. Also saying that when you pass a blocking order, it affects the intermediary and the person, since it prevents the platform from purveying information. The government, on the other hand, claims, and this is what they told the Karnataka High Court, that platforms are misused by anti-India elements for anti-India propaganda, that these contents have the potential to jeopardize the peace in the country, and it becomes essential to detect and block such misinformation to prevent a catastrophe-like situation. But the government's own track record suggests a long pattern of citing law and order and acting in the interest of accountability to bear down on its own critics. A dramatic escalation of this was witnessed in May last year in the Delhi offices of Twitter were raided by the Delhi Police's special cell, which investigates serious crimes like terrorism and drug trafficking, because Twitter had tagged a tweet by BJP spokesperson Sambit Patra as manipulated media. Patra was amongst a number of BJP handles which had tweeted about a so-called Congress toolkit containing guidelines for party workers to attack the PM for the handling of the pandemic. Fact-checking sites like Alt News had found that the document shared by the BJP was on a forged Congress letterhead. The Congress had filed an FIR against tweets by Patra and others. Instead, the police descended on Twitter, claiming to be looking for information on why the purportedly fake news pushed out by Patra, the BJP spokesperson, had been flagged as fake. This is not the only instance of the quote-unquote political crackdown on Twitter. In February of last year, Twitter first blocked and then restored multiple accounts covering the farmers' protests. The IT ministry serves a notice to Twitter warning of legal action. In June of 2021, the Twitter India head was summoned by UP police over a viral video of an elderly Muslim man who was made to chant Jai Shri Ram. In June and July of last year, Twitter had briefly removed the verified badge from the vice president's handle, possibly because his account was inactive. They also temporarily blocked the IT minister's account for violating US copyright laws. In the same month, the minister said Twitter had violated IT rules, and Twitter lost its immunity as an intermediary. Joining me now on No Spin, we have with us Dissent, cyber security expert, Pawan Duggal, also a cyber law expert, Mishi Chaudhary, technology lawyer, founder SFLC.in, Apar Gupta, lawyer and executive director, Internet Freedom Foundation, and NS Napinai, advocate, Supreme Court, and founder, Cyber Sathi Foundation. Dissent, let me start with you. To this point, that when the government says that they're trying to crack down on this kind of fake news on Twitter and trying to curb the spread of hateful content, as I said, if you look at the evidence, you look at what is going on, Twitter itself is coming out and saying that you are basically trying to stifle legitimate criticism. I mean, there is a freedom of speech, there is a right to criticize. These are posts critical of the government on the farmers' protest or whatever else it is. This is coming from that dimension as opposed to actually trying to crack down on hateful and insightful comment. And I've just listed, there are a series of instances where every time there's been something that makes the government uncomfortable as a kind of political criticism or criticism of the ruling party, criticism of the government, they crack down, but then they cite the cover of law and order or of trying to ensure a neutral internet.
Look, the problem is this is the new, fifth generation influence operation government is facing. And now it's very difficult to government to deal and detect with these attacks and deal with the existing laws. And Twitter is also right at some point of time, but at the onset, when the government sends a request to block these handles, at the onset it appears these are genuine political criticisms of a policy or a political party. But if you look carefully, and I have written multiple articles on it, there are think tanks across the world which have written articles on it, that this is how intelligence agencies across the world now operate, where they are using cyber as a mean for subversion and disinformation. And the best agency who has mastered this art of disinformation is not KGB or CIA, it's ISPR of Pakistan, where 4,500 professionals with a budget of 6,000 crores are working day and night to spread disinformation in India. Now, you look at Delhi riots, you look at anti-CA propaganda, you look at 370. So now the problem is
I'm saying on what grounds?
Just 1 minute. Yeah. Any sort of censorship for political criticism is wrong. But any sort of censorship or blocking of accounts of people who are operating across the border, masquerading and impersonating as Indian citizens is absolutely right. Now the problem
but I'm saying the government has supplied no proof. Hold on. You've spoken. The government has supplied no such proof that this is all coming from across the border. As I said, look at the bad faith actions of the government. That the Twitter flags a tweet by a BJP spokesperson as manipulated media. The special cell of Delhi police lands up in Twitter headquarters. I'm trying to say, this is not about, this doesn't seem to be about saying, oh, there's Pakistani misinformation or from...
Yes, of course, there could be cases of high-handedness. There could be cases of high-handedness because what happens, you see, when you are looking at, more than, you could say 5 lakh accounts were tweeting against the government. Why only block 1,200 accounts? No, because those 1,200 accounts were run by ISPR. You ask any disinformation lab, they will prove. And none of these people have come for KYC. So when you deal with the coordinated disinformation, you take out a data set, obviously there will be errors. There will be 50, 60 odd genuine handles which might also be get tagged. And that is the problem across the world.
Right, okay.
If you look at American election,
I'll come to the American elections in just a second. But I'm saying you're making very sweeping... Okay, let's just take the wider point here, Apar Gupta, that is this a credible argument that in the attempt to weed out large-scale kind of guided or organized misinformation by countries hostile to us, that there's collateral damage, that some legitimate handles and there's legitimate criticism gets blocked?
So, Vasu, is the action actually matching the concern? Because it doesn't seem so. The underlying basis for the blocking directions which were issued, for instance, on the farmer protest handles, they by themselves, the reasons behind them, the orders by itself also are not in the public domain. But from what we do know, a lot of these blocking orders have been directed against tweets which are critical of government policies. One such tweet was actually read out by the lawyer for the petitioner, Mr. Arvind Attar, which said that I love my country, but I will criticize my government by itself. And I think this hits at the root of the issue. The second thing which you have referred as a factual situation that occurred was the labeling of a tweet as manipulated media. And that led to a visit by the Delhi police on the headquarters of Twitter by itself.
Right.
In this respect, I'd like to point out that there were right to information requests filed by where I work with the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and they had indeed issued 2 letters to Twitter saying that they should not label tweets as manipulated media.
Right.
But they did not do it under any provision of law. It was only a request. So these actions today are quite often being taken beyond law,
Okay,
sometimes beyond the powers which are vested by
all right,
within a
Pawan
government.
Dugal. Okay, this is the problem that in a general sense, if a government or any regulatory body wants to go after misinformation on social media or even try to remedy bad practices of social media giants aren't getting a clean pass here. That's fine, but you have the government and the ruling party, which itself promotes misinformation all the time and acts against anybody trying to call it out. Twitter labels the tweet of one of its spokespersons as misinformation. They get hit, not the person who did the misinformation. So how do you then judge this government's actions in good faith when they say we're cracking down on fake news and misinformation when they promote it themselves? Sorry, you're on mute, Pawan.
The problem lies in the law. The way the law has been drafted, it's given so much of immense power to the government. When I look at the power of blocking under Section 69A of the Information Technology Act, that a variety of circumstances can come under the same. So what the government is currently doing is under the parameters of law, which are still not being subject to appropriate checks and balances by an appropriate judicially reviewed decision. So that's the reason why you find these kind of anomalies coming in. Logically, if at every point of time, every service provider is going to ask, sir, first give me a notice, give the affected party a notice before I block, then the very purpose of blocking gets completely defeated.
No, but even on the point of the law, though that wasn't my question, Pawan, even on the point of the law, the Twitter legal argument in the court was that even these blocking orders are violative of the law, that when you say you ask us to block entire accounts, URLs, that's violative of the law, according to them.
Well,
but
when I look at the...
But my question was different. My question was, when you have the regulator itself, the so-called watchdog, itself is quote-unquote guilty of bad faith actions like spreading misinformation, like spreading fake news, cracking down on attempts to curb its own spreading of that, then what do you do? This is beyond the law.
The fact still remains is that you cannot expect the milk on the pillow of the cat to remain for a long period of time. The fact still remains is that till such time you do not come up with appropriate checks and balances, such kinds of exercise or powers are bound to take place. Therefore, there's a need for reading down appropriate checks and balances and reasonable restrictions. Because when I look at the entire parameters of security, sovereignty, integrity of friendly relations with other nations, public order, decency, morality, these are very, very broad.
Those are very broad terms. Okay, agreed. NS Napanai, again, when one looks at, and I say this again, it's not that because Twitter is now out there, defending free speech, that social media platforms like Twitter get a free pass. We see how much hate and misinformation is promoted, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, all of that. But at the same time, this constant attempt by the government to try to curb handles and posts putting out critical information, can this be justified as combating fake news and challenges to India's security, or is this further attempts to stifle dissent?
I would like to just clarify on one point that's already raised, and then in that process answer your question also, Srinivasan. Firstly, the law lays down very clearly what is permissible and impermissible in terms of 69A, and it has already been subjected to judicial review. It is incorrect to say it has not been subjected to judicial review. In Shreya Singh's case, 69A and the rules framed thereunder were put to test, and the Supreme Court said that these are valid because of the checks and balances. And that effectively answers your question too, which is, are the checks and balances really being effective in this instance?
Right.
And so on that note, the first aspect is, it is not for Twitter to stand in judgment in terms of whether the checks and balances have been effectively put into play or not.
Right.
That is for a court to decide. So the only thing that was open to Twitter, and therefore I'm glad they've gone to court finally now, the only thing that was open to Twitter was, one, respond to notices with their position. If they felt that some notice that has been issued to them was unjustified, then it was open to them to question it.
All right.
But that is it. That's the only role that 69A
As far as Twitter is concerned.
is for them.
Okay.
Thereafter, if the government machinery, including the designated officer or the committee for reviewing it and the review committee, which comes at the third level, if each of them felt that it was a tweet that needed to be removed, if it's the entire account which needed to be blocked,
Right.
then the option open for either the person, the victim, affected, or, and here the effective word is or. It is incorrect to say that both the user as well as the intermediary need to be issued notice. It's or as per the section.
Right.
And or as affirmed by the Supreme Court in Shreya Singhal.
Okay,
At that stage, the only thing open to us as a remedy is to go to court.
Okay.
And that becomes the last bastion of democracy, and that's something we always needed to exercise.
Needed to do.
Now
Okay.
Twitter has done it, and it is for the court to decide
whether it's
validly removed or not.
Okay, Mishi, do you think that there is government heavy-handedness here in terms of this taking down or asking? This is not Twitter, by the way, it's YouTube posts, it's across the board. Or is there some rationale in saying there's this campaign of misinformation against us?
Well, I would say that ostensibly misinformation is a great excuse to use and control whatever is the free flow of information. There are always ways to say that what we are doing is because there's a ton of misinformation. But if we were all being honest, we would know if honestly we were trying to curb misinformation, who it will actually lead to. All political parties are now weaponizing social media for a variety of purposes as it suits them.
Right.
And that's a phenomenon which is global. It's not restricted to India. But this entire heavy-handedness is particular of our democracy. No other democracy is mediating relationships between government and a social media platform through FIRs, like is happening in India. The kind of a thing of saying that if my employee is going to be threatened by private, personal criminal action, obviously I'm going to behave differently. This is not to say that social media companies are without blame, but what happens is when we talk about these issues, it's so easy to conflate everything and throw the kitchen sink about the problem of, oh, Twitter is not removing this, or Facebook is not doing that. We are all doing it in favor of everything.
Sure.
Overall, I believe is that the power is always taken away from the user.
Okay.
We are being told, watch from the sideline, while we, the government, will pretend we are protecting you, and Twitter will say Twitter are going to protect your free speech and expression.
Okay.
But when push comes to shove, every company will fold to government demands as long as India is an important market. And government is not really respecting the laws in the same way. Otherwise, there would be no reason to move to the court.
Okay.
Also in the Shreya Singhal judgment, the court did say that the notice should be provided so that it can be challenged under Article 226 to the court. And it is not for a bureaucrat only to decide and exercise a judgment of something can be blocked or not.
Right.
Those notices, when they're not provided and everything is shrouded in secrecy, then how are we actually going to
know? Would it help, Jitin, would it help the government's case when they say that we are cracking down in good faith, not bad faith ways against all these handles, if they themselves were not either as a government or as a political party constantly promoting misinformation, pushing out misinformation themselves?
Look, Vasu, I think on government's part, as a country, as a society, what we need is that Ministry of Electronic Society, MHA and government has to move away from this regulating free speech and censorship. I think that role now has to be transferred to a regulator. In our country, regulators in financial sector, in share market, SEBI, RBI, they have worked relatively effectively well without any political controversy. So if this blocking of 1,200 odd handles out of 5 lakh who were tweeting, if it was passed by a regulator, this controversy would not have arisen. Second, what government has to do in collaboration with Twitter and big tech is that if you have a case of misinformation, the 69A orders after 3 months or 4 months can be made public. So that, it will inspire more confidence. You can have a timeline. 3, you can ask Twitter to do a forced KYC of this 1,200, 1,500 doubtful accounts. So if we actually believe these are part of the disinformation campaign,
okay, but what do you do? But what would you do, as one of the panelists said, all political parties are weaponizing misinformation. You're the ruling party. Hold on. Let me finish. Hold on. You're the ruling party. You yourself are both, in a sense, the arsonist and the firefighter. You yourself are spreading misinformation, and then you're saying, oh, we are supposedly trying to fight misinformation, which you selectively do. You will ensure that your own misinformation is allowed, others is blocked. What do you do with that situation?
That is why government has to move away from dealing with these things. Leave it to a regulator which is independent of any political influence. Number two, on Twitter's part, I agree with Napinai. There is no role for Twitter in our constitution to become the interpreter of constitution. That is left only to the government and only to the courts. They can under no circumstances refuse to comply with any government order and not go to court. And very important, Vishnu, you have to understand. You see, they blocked Donald Trump. For what? They say that he was instigating violence or hate speech or whatever. But that was not done under any executive order, police request or a court order. It was 5 people sitting in a boardroom decide to block a sitting US president, calling him that he is incapable of running a Twitter account, but he can handle a nuclear arsenal.
Okay, Apar, just a second.
Who can handle a nuclear arsenal cannot operate a Twitter account.
Okay, so Jiten, just a second.
Act as East India companies and Viceroys.
Okay, Apar, you think that the government, not outsourcing, but leaving this to an independent regulatory body will prevent the larger problem of the government and political parties themselves who are in power curbing their own impulses to push out fake news?
That would not take care of the entire problem. The entire problem actually starts from a lack of transparency, Vasu. The orders are not made public because the person whose resource is blocked is not given a notice, is not given the opportunity of a hearing of leading their defense. And the general public is not provided a copy of the order, and then they are not provided the opportunity of approaching a high court in remedy. So the first level of any kind of reform which we are looking at has to be approached from transparency. The second is that regulatory bodies by themselves sound as very ideal scenarios to rest all controversies, but they are very shapes and sizes of regulatory bodies. We have seen ourselves that capture of regulatory bodies is possible when the selection criteria and the appointment committee itself is composed of people which is
so there's
only
a challenge
of the government.
There's
so
a
that's
challenge.
what I'll say. I'll say that it needs to be done, but it needs to be done in a way which brings in transparency
globally,
and independence.
Okay, NS Nipanai, very briefly, we're right out of time. Globally, what's a model where you can actually have regulation of social media without all this problem, this bad faith of the government trying to curb dissent, etc.?
Actually, we are looking at it as if it's an either-or situation of having an independent regulatory body and transparency. We should really look for both. In fact, in my book, I have clearly laid down
globally,
that the right hand, yes, globally also that's the way.
What's the example? Is there a country, is there a model that you can cite as an example?
I cannot cite specifically for this particular issue, but enough is being brought out in terms of hate speech regulation now, which talks about our law commission itself has pointed to that, where they have specifically talked about how and in what manner hate speech can, fake news can be regulated. And one aspect of it, Srinivasan, if I can just complete this.
Very briefly.
If you look at the current scenario, you have the right hand deciding whether the left hand did the right thing or not. And therefore, moving it out to an independent regulatory body is necessary.
All right,
and
Mishi.
Transparency is definitely a necessity. And these are trends that you see globally.
Okay, we are
and more as a policy rather than
a
legal.
Okay, Mishi, do you want to quickly make a point? Is there any global model template that would apply?
So the global model is very different based on which country you're going to be talking about. If you want to talk about the US, the First Amendment, which is about their free speech rights, they're much broader. They're also grappling with the same situation. But executive is now trying to find solutions through various other bodies which are included, not trying to arm twist a company by saying we are going to actually hold your executives responsible for that. In India, the tendency seems to be that Article 19.2, or we need to have reasonable restrictions, somehow has become a tool to say what I don't like, that should not be allowed on social media. I think the model is to say that there's no, this is true for all what panelists have said. Transparency, telling people would be required, but courts are not a practical mechanism. We all know how much time they take in India. and at what speed social media works at this stage right now.
Okay, all right, let's see.
It is a complicated situation, and there are no good,
There's no
simple
easy
answers.
answers. Okay. All right. It is truly, something that's quite a maze, but we will come back to this. We're out of time. Thank you all so much for joining, and thank you so much for watching. Good night.